If you tried to move your money into physical silver this morning and saw that transaction declined message on your screen, I need you to stop what you are doing and watch this. Because what you just experienced was not a technical glitch. It wasn't a fraud alert from a bank looking out for your safety. What you just witnessed was the first wave of financial capital controls being deployed in real time against retail investors. And the mainstream media is pretending it is not happening. Picture the scene. It's 10 p.m. You're on bullion or COMEX. You see the silver price coiled like a spring, ready to break out. You've got the cash, maybe $3,000, sitting in your checking account. You add 2 monster boxes to your cart, you enter your card details, and you hit submit. But you know that's a lie. You refresh your banking app, the balance is right there. You try again, declined. You call the customer service line, you wait on hold for 20 minutes, and finally a representative tells you, this transaction has been flagged as high risk. We are currently limiting transfers to unverified bullion dealers. High risk, unverified. These are the keywords. And when you ask when this policy started, they tell you it's internal compliance. When you ask to speak to a manager, the line goes dead. This is not anecdotal. This is not just one guy on Reddit. This is happening at Chase, at Wells Fargo, and at Bank of America. It is a coordinated algorithmic soft lock on your financial sovereignty. While CNBC is busy talking about cooling inflation, thousands of silver stackers are reporting the exact same glitch. The banks are terrified. They see the COMEX vaults being drained of physical metal. They see the dollar's purchasing power evaporating. And they've realized that if everyone tries to hit the exit ramp at once, the whole system collapses. They aren't just blocking your purchase because they're worried about fraud. They're reblocking it because they don't have the metal to back the paper promises they've sold you. Let me show you the smoking gun, the code they're using to trap you. Every merchant has a code, an MCC. For years, silver was just retail. But recently, the banking sector quietly reclassified merchant category code 5094, precious metals, into the same risk tier as offshore gambling and illicit substances. They've programmed their AI to see your attempt to buy silver as a capital flight risk. This is a feature, not a bug. They are intentionally creating friction to stop you from converting devaluing digital digits into hard, physical wealth. They are barricading the lifeboats. In this video, I'm going to show you the internal memos, the surge in silver purchase failed data, and exactly how the banks are using security reviews as a legal shield to keep your money hostage. If you don't own your silver in physical form right now, the window to buy it through the traditional system is closing. I am going to show you how to bypass these digital gatekeepers before the great lock-in is complete. Because if you wait for the news to report this, it will already be too late. When you look at your screen and see that red transaction declined text, you aren't just looking at a payment error. You are staring into the face of a new invisible wall. This is Chapter 1, the invisible wall, and it is the moment where the abstract concept of a bank run meets the digital reality of a lockout. For decades, the friction in the financial system was almost non-existent. You could move your digits from a checking account to a brokerage, a crypto exchange, or a bullion dealer with the click of a button. But as we move deeper into 2026, those buttons are being deactivated. The data doesn't lie. Since the massive breakout of late 2025, where silver shattered through historical resistance and gold climbed toward $4,400 an ounce, the glitch reports have gone parabolic. We've analyzed the heat maps from the major online dealers, industry titans like Apimex, Bullion, and SD Bullion, and the results are staggering. In the last 90 days, there has been a 400% surge in reported soft declines. A soft decline is the bank's most effective weapon because it doesn't look like a ban. It looks like a mistake. It is the contact your bank message that puts you in a customer service loop designed to exhaust your patience until the price of the metal moves out of your reach. The banks leading this charge aren't the small-town credit unions. They are the too-big-to-fail institutions. We are seeing a concentrated pattern emerging from Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo. These entities are the primary nodes of the Federal Reserve's network, and they are the first to feel the liquidity squeeze. When you try to buy silver, you are effectively trying to withdraw your deposit and turn it into a high-velocity hard asset. To the bank, your deposit is their liability. In a system where bond yields are spiking and the value of their underlying collateral is cratering, they cannot afford a mass exodus of retail capital. Every ounce of silver you take delivery of is one less brick in their crumbling foundation. This is a policy, not a bug. If it were a bug, it would be random. But it isn't. We've cross-referenced these declines with other high-ticket retail purchases. You can go out right now and spend $5,000 on a high-end OLED television or a luxury watch from a boutique, and the transaction will glide through the pipes with zero resistance. But try to spend that same $5,000 on silver rounds, An asset that represents an exit from the fiat regime and the algorithmic Iron Curtain drops instantly. This is the definition of capital controls. Historically, capital controls were loud. They involved soldiers at borders and the closing of bank doors. In 2026, capital controls are quiet, digital, and enforced by an AI that has already decided you are a flight risk. The internal logic is chillingly efficient. Banks have moved precious metal dealers into the most restricted tiers of merchant category codes. They are using artificial intelligence fraud prevention as a legal shield. When the bank representative tells you they are protecting your security, they are using a script designed by a compliance department that is actually protecting the bank's liquidity. They know that the COMEX inventories are at decadal lows. They know that the physical silver market is in a structural deficit for the 5th year running. Most importantly, they know that the paper price you see on your screen is a fantasy that only survives as long as you don't demand the physical metal. As the invisible wall thickens, the window for the average person to secure physical wealth is narrowing. We are seeing the emergence of a two-tier financial system, one for those trapped in the digital-only net, where their wealth is subject to the whims of an algorithm, and one for the informed savers who managed to jump the fence before the gates were locked. The surge in silver purchase failed search trends is the smoke. The liquidity crisis in the repo market is the fire. You are being told that the system is functional while the exits are being quietly welded shut. This isn't a drill, and it isn't a conspiracy. It is the cold, hard math of a banking sector that has realized it no longer has enough real money to satisfy the demands of the paper world. If you can still find a way to buy, if you can still find a dealer that hasn't been blacklisted, you are operating on borrowed time. The wall is already here. Most people just haven't tried to walk through it yet. The failure of your debit card at the checkout screen of a bullion dealer is the final heartbeat of a dying era of financial freedom. We have entered the age of the death of the debit card. But to understand why your plastic is being rejected, you have to understand the invisible war between physical sovereignty and digital containment. Your bank does not hate silver. They hate silver they cannot control. If you were to log into your brokerage app right now and purchase $10,000 worth of SLV or a silver mining ETF, the transaction would be seamless. There would be no fraud alerts, no 18-minute hold times, and no condescending lectures from a compliance officer. This is because when you buy paper silver, you are not leaving the burning building. You are just moving to a different room on the same floor. The banking establishment loves paper assets because paper assets are tethered to the system by 1,000 invisible strings called counterparty risk. Counterparty risk is the dirty secret of the modern financial world. It is the simple, terrifying reality that your wealth is only yours, as long as the person on the other side of the contract stays solvent and keeps their word. When you buy a silver ETF, you don't own metal. You own a promise. You own a digital receipt that says you are entitled to the value of silver, provided the fund actually has the bars, provided the auditors are being honest, and provided the government doesn't declare a national emergency that freezes all brokerage accounts. The bank remains the gatekeeper of your wealth. They can track it, they can tax it, they can fee it to death, and most importantly, they can bail it in if the banking sector faces a systemic collapse. In the eyes of the institution, a customer with $1 million in a digital account is a source of collateral they can use to balance their books. A customer who has withdrawn that $1 million and converted it into physical silver bars stored in a private safe is a hole in their balance sheet. This is why the debit card is being phased out as a tool for physical acquisition. The moment you take delivery of an ounce of silver, the bank loses its power. You have achieved physical sovereignty. You have moved your labor, your time, and your family's future into a realm where an algorithm cannot reach it. An ounce of silver in your hand does not require login. It does not require a high-speed internet connection or a functioning power grid. It does not ask for permission from a central bank to have value. It is the ultimate no to the digital panopticon. By blocking your debit card at the point of sale for physical metal while leaving the door wide open for paper instruments, the banks are effectively herding you back into the digital corral. They are forcing a choice upon you. Stay in the system and play by our rules, or find yourself locked out of the market entirely. The shift is systematic. We are seeing a divergence where a debit card is being repurposed as a surveillance tool rather than a spending tool. Every time you attempt to buy physical metal, you are flagging yourself as a person who desires independence. And in the current economic climate, independence is seen as a threat to stability. The banks prefer the paper market because it allows for cow or rehypothecation, a fancy term for the practice of selling the same ounce of silver to 100 different people at the same time. This is how they keep the price suppressed. As long as you're content with a digital number on a screen, they can create an infinite supply of paper silver to meet demand. But the moment you demand physical delivery, the illusion shatters. There is only so much metal in the vaults of the COMEX and the LBMA. When the physical supply runs dry, the paper promises become worthless. The death of the debit card is the bank's way of preventing a run on the physical vaults. If they can make it difficult, frustrating, and socially stigmatized to buy physical silver, they can keep the majority of the population trapped in the paper trap. They want you to believe that a debit card decline is a localized error, but it is actually a macroeconomic strategy. They are protecting the counterparty at the expense of the sovereign. They are betting that you will give up, that you will see the transaction declined message and decide it's too much of a headache, opting instead for the ease of a digital ETF. But that ease is a trap. It is the ease of a golden cage. When you take physical delivery, you are removing yourself from the fractional reserve game. You are declaring that you no longer trust the bank to be the custodian of your life's work. This is the ultimate act of defiance. The banks lose their leverage over you because you no longer need their permission to be wealthy. You have bypassed the liquidity black hole and anchored yourself to something that has survived every empire, every currency collapse, and every banking crisis in human history. The invisible wall we discussed in Chapter 1 is built specifically to protect this paper illusion. The banks know that if even 5% of the population realized the difference between paper promises and physical sovereignty, the entire digital house of cards would fold overnight. Your rejected debit card is the sounding of the alarm. It is the system telling you that the exit is closing. The question isn't why the bank is blocking the transaction. The question is how much longer you're willing to let them hold your freedom hostage in exchange for the convenience of a plastic card that they can turn off at any moment. As the transition from visible inflation to visible capital controls accelerates, the divide between the paper holders and the silver stackers will become the defining line of the new economy. One group will be holding receipts for a ghost town, while the other will be holding the only real money left on the planet. To truly understand the transaction declined notification on your screen, you have to look past the pixels and into the hidden architecture of the banking system, specifically a 4-digit sequence that is currently acting as a digital padlock on your wealth. This is Chapter 3, MCC 5294, the Silver Trap. Every time you use your card, the bank doesn't see Silver Eagles or Constitutional Silver. They see a Merchant Category Code, or MCC. This code tells the bank's risk algorithm exactly what kind of business you're dealing with. For decades, the code 594, designated for precious stones and metals, watches, and jewelry, was a sleepy, low-stakes category. It was the same code used for a local jeweler or a watch repair shop. It was viewed as a luxury retail purchase, no more dangerous to the system than a high-end handbag or a designer suit. But as we sit here in 2026, the status of MCC 5294 has undergone a silent, radical transformation. Behind closed doors, the major banking institutions have reclassified this code, moving it out of standard retail and into the high-risk tier. It now sits on the same digital blacklist as offshore gambling, adult entertainment, and high-risk foreign currency exchanges. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a response to a sudden surge in jewelry fraud. It was a calculated move to justify the automatic transaction blocks and the mandatory cooling-off periods that are now plaguing the silver market. By labeling silver dealers with the same risk profile as a fly-by-night casino, the banks have granted themselves the legal cover to freeze your funds under the guise of consumer protection. The silver trap works through a process of algorithmic profiling. When you hit the buy button at an online dealer like SD Bullion, the transaction travels through the network tagged with MCC 5094. In the old world, the bank's AI would check your balance and approve the sale in milliseconds. In the new world, that 5094 tag triggers an immediate security review. The algorithm isn't looking for fraud, it's looking for capital flight. It cross-references your purchase against a set of internal thresholds of concern. If the dollar amount is significant, or if you've made multiple purchases in a short window, the AI generates a soft decline. It tells the merchant your funds are insufficient or the card is blocked, forcing you to call the bank. This is where the trap tightens. Once you are on the phone, the cooling off period begins. The bank representative is trained to treat your silver purchase as a suspicious event. They will ask you if you are sure about the vendor, or if you understand the risks of high volatility assets. They are using psychological friction to slow you down, hoping that by the time you navigate the bureaucracy, the price of silver will have spiked or your resolve will have wavered. They are treating your attempt to buy real physical money as a symptom of a scam. It is a brilliant, subtle form of capital control because it never officially bans the purchase. It just makes the process so exhausting that the average person gives up. But the most insidious part of the MCC 5094 reclassification is what it does to the silver dealers themselves. Because they are now labeled as high risk, these dealers are being hit with higher processing fees, more frequent chargeback disputes, and rolling reserves, where the bank holds onto their revenue for weeks at a time. This puts immense pressure on the dealers' liquidity, forcing many of them to raise premiums or stop accepting credit cards altogether. The banks are effectively strangling the supply chain from both ends, making it harder for you to spend your money and harder for the dealer to receive it. They tell you this is about anti-money laundering, AML, and know your customer, KYC regulations. They claim they are protecting the integrity of the financial system. But if that were true, why aren't they blocking transactions at high-end pawn shops or luxury watch boutiques with the same ferocity? The answer is simple. A Rolex is a consumer good. A tube of Silver Eagles is a monetary threat. One stays within the framework of spending, and while the other represents an exit. The banks have realized that they cannot stop you from wanting silver, so they have decided to make the very act of buying it look like a criminal enterprise. This is the algorithmic Iron Curtain in action. It is a system designed to keep your wealth trapped within the digital walls of the banking sector where it can be devalued by inflation and used as collateral for their failing bond portfolios. When you see that 5094 code, you are looking at the boundary line of the new economy. On one side is the compliant digital citizen whose transactions are always approved because they are only buying what the system allows. On the other side is the sovereign individual who recognizes that high risk is simply the bank S word for independence. The trap is set, and the invisible wall is only getting higher. As we move forward, the banks will likely add even more layers to this code, perhaps requiring secondary authentication or manual sign-offs for any transaction involving precious metals. They are building a cage of compliance, and MCC 5094 is the lock. Understanding this code is the first step in learning how to pick that lock, learning that when the bank says transaction declined, what they are really saying is, we cannot afford to let you leave. The more you understand the mechanics of the trap, the more you realize that the only way to win this game is to stop playing by their rules and seek out the Guerilla methods of acquisition that we will discuss later in this video. The digital gates are locking, but for those who know how the software works, there is still a backdoor. To understand why your bank is desperately clawing at your sleeve, trying to keep you from clicking that buy button, you have to look past the local branch and into the hollowed out vaults of the global financial hubs. This is Chapter 4, the COMEX Ghost Town. The reason for the invisible wall isn't a glitch, and it isn't even just a policy. It is a mathematical necessity born of desperation. The banks aren't blocking your silver purchase because they hate the metal. They are blocking it because the physical cupboards are bare. As we stand here in January 2026, the two pillars of the silver market, the COMEX in New York and the LBMA in London, have been transformed into ghost towns, all echoing with the sound of empty vaults and the panicked whispers of bullion banks that have sold the same ounce of silver to 300 different people. The numbers coming out of the exchanges at the start of this year are nothing short of apocalyptic for the status quo. For 5 consecutive years, the world has run a structural silver deficit, but 2025 was the year the dam finally broke. Industrial demand from AI hardware, high-performance semiconductors, and the global solar infrastructure has effectively cannibalized the available supply. We entered 2026 with COMEX registered inventories, the actual physical bars available to satisfy delivery, down by more than 70% from their 2020 peaks. In London, the LBMA vaults have been drained at a pace that has left industrial users in a state of sheer panic. The why behind the how is that the banks have reached a physical breaking point. They are staring at a massive delivery month where investors are no longer content with a cash settlement. People want the metal, but the metal isn't there. This has created what insiders call the Great Silver Disconnect. If you look at your screen right now, the paper price might say $72 an ounce, but that price is a work of fiction. It is a price for a digital contract that may never see the light of day. In the real world, in the physical hubs of Tokyo, Dubai, and Shanghai, physical silver is being traded for as high as $130 an ounce. This 80% premium is the truth gap. It is the difference between what the banks want you to believe silver is worth and what the world is actually willing to pay to hold it. The banks are blocking your transaction because every ounce of physical silver you buy at the paper price of $72 is an immediate $58 loss for them. They are essentially being forced to sell you a life jacket for half price while the ship is sinking, and they simply don't have enough life jackets to go around. To make matters worse, a geopolitical black swan has just landed. On January 1st, 2026, China, the world's largest refiner of silver, officially implemented strict new export licensing requirements. By ring-fencing nearly 65% of the global refined silver supply for their own domestic industrial and monetary use, they have effectively cut off the Western bullion banks from their primary source of replenishment. The COMEX and the LBMA can no longer rely on a steady flow of Chinese silver to plug the holes in their vaults. They are trapped in a liquidity black hole where the demand for physical metal is infinite, but the supply is finite and rapidly disappearing. This is why the transaction failed message is appearing on your screen. The banks are using algorithmic friction to protect their remaining physical collateral. They are terrified of a physicalization event, a moment where the 378-to-1 ratio of paper claims to physical ounces is finally called due. If even a fraction of retail investors successfully demanded physical delivery today, the COMEX would be forced into a force majeure event, a legal declaration of bankruptcy that would shatter the illusion of the paper-silver market forever. To prevent this, they have turned your banking app into a gatekeeper. They have programmed the system to treat your desire for silver as a security risk because, to the bank's survival, your financial independence is a risk. They are trying to buy time. By blocking retail purchases, raising margin requirements, and triggering fraud alerts, they are attempting to shake out the bullion with the weak hands and force the price back down through paper manipulation. But you cannot print silver. You cannot bail in a silver bar that is sitting in a private safe. The banks know that the era of cheap, accessible silver is over, and they are doing everything in their power to make sure they are the ones holding the remaining physical supply while you are left holding a digital receipt for a ghost town. The invisible wall is the only thing standing between the current banking system and a total collateral collapse. When you see that decline, remember, it's not because your money isn't good, it's because their promises are no longer backed by anything you can actually hold. To truly understand the trap that is closing around the silver market today, we have to look back at the ghosts of financial history, because the banks aren't inventing a new playbook. They are simply digitizing an old one. This is Chapter 5, Lessons from Lebanon and Greece. If you are waiting for a televised announcement from the Federal Reserve or a headline in the New York Times telling you that you're no longer allowed to move your money into hard assets, you are waiting for a day that will never come. That is not how the trap is set. Capital controls never begin with a formal decree. They begin with the word glitch. They begin with technical difficulties at the ATM, server maintenance on your brokerage app, and enhanced security reviews on the exact type of purchases that would allow you to escape a failing currency. Look at the blueprint provided by the Lebanese banking collapse of 2019. It didn't start with the banks shutting their doors. It started with subtle administrative friction. First, the daily withdrawal limits were quietly lowered. Then, customers trying to wire money abroad for non-essential purposes found their transactions stuck in a state of perpetual processing. The banks didn't say the money was gone, they just made it impossible to move. By the time the Lebanese people realized that their life savings had been vaporized by a central bank Ponzi scheme, the invisible wall was already 10 feet thick. The digital digits on their screens were still there, but the buy button for the outside world had been disconnected. We are seeing the exact same pattern today with MCC 5094. Your silver purchase is being labeled as non-essential or high risk by an algorithm that has been programmed to keep you locked inside a burning building. Then look at Greece in 2015. During the height of the Eurozone crisis, the Greek government didn't tell the citizens they were going to seize their wealth. Instead, they simply paused the system. They called it a bank holiday to protect the stability of the euro. When the banks finally reopened, the citizens found that they could only withdraw 60 euros a day. More importantly, they found that they were prohibited from purchasing precious metals or moving capital into foreign accounts. The system had effectively been turned into a closed loop. If you were inside the loop, your wealth was subject to whatever haircuts or bail-ins the authorities deemed necessary. If you had managed to get your wealth into physical silver or gold before the holiday, you were a free actor in a crushed economy. If you were one day too late, you were a victim. The lesson from Lebanon and Greece is that the window to exit the system is only open when the system looks like it is functioning perfectly. The moment the glitch becomes frequent, the window is already halfway shut. In 2026, the glitch is the transaction decline you see at JM Bullion. It is the bank representative telling you that your silver order is being held for a 14-day verification period. They are using time as a weapon. In a hyperinflationary environment, or during a silver supply squeeze, 14 days is an eternity. By the time they verify your funds, the price of silver has moved up another 15%, and your purchasing power has been decimated. This is the soft lock-in, and it is designed to ensure that the retail investor is the last person to reach the lifeboats. This blueprint is being executed with terrifying precision across the Western world right now. The banks have learned that they don't need to pass a law to stop you from buying silver. They just need to control the plumbing of the payment system. They know that most people will give up after the second or third transaction declined message. They know that the normalcy bias will lead you to believe that the bank is just having a bad day, or that your card is acting up. But history tells us that these are never isolated incidents. They are the preliminary tremors before the earthquake. In every historical instance of capital controls, the authorities used the exact same language we hear today: protecting the consumer, preventing fraud, and ensuring market integrity. In reality, they are ensuring that your capital remains available for their own survival. During the 1933 gold confiscation in the United States, the messaging was focused on stopping hoarding to help the economy recover. Today, the messaging is about stopping high-risk transactions to protect you from volatility. Different words, same intent. They need your dollars to stay in the bank so they can use them to buy the very government bonds that are currently losing value. They cannot allow you to take those dollars and buy the one asset, silver, that is historically proven to thrive when the banking sector fails. The invisible wall is the modern version of the 1933 executive order, but instead of a pen, they are using a line of code. They aren't coming to your house to take your silver. They are simply making sure you can never acquire it in the first place. This is why the reports from the COMEX ghost town in Chapter 4 are so critical. The banks are facing a physical shortage, and they are using the Lebanon strategy to manage the demand. They are throttling the exit. If you can't buy silver with your debit card, and you can't wire money to a dealer without a security review, you are effectively trapped in a digital-only currency. As we move toward the climax of this crisis, these technical difficulties will become more frequent and more aggressive. We will see the cooling-off periods extend from days to weeks. We will see the daily spending limits on precious metal categories drop until they are practically zero. This is the blueprint of the trap. It starts with a notification on your phone and ends with a realization that your money is no longer yours. It is a permission-based coupon that can only be spent where the gatekeepers allow. The lessons of Greece and Lebanon teach us that the only time to secure your sovereignty is while the glitch still feels like an annoyance rather than a catastrophe. Once the bank holiday is announced, the game is already over. The reason your silver purchase was declined this morning isn't just a matter of bank policy. It is a symptom of a systemic heart attack occurring in the very foundation of the global financial architecture. This is Chapter 6, the banking collateral collapse. To understand why the invisible wall has been erected, we have to look at what the banks are actually holding behind those digital screens. We have been told for decades that our savings are deposits sitting safely in a vault, but the reality is far more predatory. In the eyes of the law and the balance sheet, your money is an unsecured loan to the bank, and that loan is currently being held hostage to prevent a total collateral collapse. The silver blockade is not an isolated event. It is a defensive maneuver by an industry that is watching its primary life support system, the government bond market, disintegrate in real time. To understand the connection, you have to understand how a bank stays solvent. When you hand a bank $10,000, they don't keep it in cash. They use that money to buy safe collateral, primarily long-term government bonds and treasury notes. These bonds are the bedrock of the entire global economy. They are the pristine collateral that banks use to lend to each other in the overnight repo markets we discussed earlier. But as we move through 2026, those safe bonds have become toxic. As inflation remains sticky and interest rates stay elevated to combat the devaluing dollar, the market value of those old bonds has plummeted. If a bank bought a 10-year treasury bond in 2021 when rates were near zero, and they try to sell that bond today when the 10-year yield is pushing past 5%, they have to take a massive loss. This is called an unrealized loss, and across the U.S. banking system, these losses have ballooned into the trillions of dollars. This creates a terrifying liquidity trap. As long as you leave your money in the bank, they can pretend those bonds are still worth their original value. They call this hold-to-maturity accounting. It's a legal form of make-believe that keeps the bank looking solvent on paper. But the moment you try to withdraw your money, specifically to buy a high-velocity, outside-the-system asset like physical silver, you force the bank to turn that unrealized loss into a realized one. They have to sell their crashing bonds to get the cash to settle your transaction with the bullion dealer. If enough people do this at once, the bank's capital cushion evaporates and the institution collapses. This is why they are blocking your silver purchase. Your savings are being used as a shield to keep the bank from falling into a solvency black hole. The banks are trapped in a vicious cycle. They see the silver price rising and the dollar falling, which makes more people want to buy silver. But every dollar that leaves the system to buy silver is a dollar that can no longer be used to prop up the failing bond market. By using MCC 5094 to trigger transaction declined messages, the banks are effectively implementing a soft bail-in. In a traditional bail-in, the bank simply seizes your funds to stay afloat. In this digital version, they don't take the money. They just prevent you from spending it on the one thing that would protect you from their failure. They are forcing you to remain a creditor to a failing institution. They are keeping you tethered to the ship while the hull is actively taking on water. This connection to the collateral crisis explains the why behind the timing. The silver blockade intensified exactly when the bond market hit its most recent death cross. The banks know that silver is the canary in the coal mine. When the silver to gold ratio begins to compress and physical premiums explode, it signals that smart money has lost confidence in the debt-based system. If the general public follows suit and starts using their debit cards to buy every ounce of silver available, the velocity of money leaving the banks would create a liquidity vortex that the Federal Reserve could not contain, even with trillion-dollar injections. The silver blockade is a desperate attempt to slow down the great exit. We are witnessing a historical shift where the banking sector has moved from being a service provider to being a jailer. They are no longer competing for your business by offering safety or yield. They are maintaining their existence by restricting your mobility. Your savings are being held hostage because they are the only thing keeping the collateral collapse at bay. If the banks let you buy silver, they lose their collateral. If they lose their collateral, they lose their ability to borrow. If they can't borrow, the too big to fail institutions become too dead to save. Every time you call your bank to argue about a blocked silver purchase, remember that you aren't talking to a security officer. You are talking to a debt collector who is trying to keep your loan on their books. They are terrified of the physicality event, where the world realizes that there are more paper claims on wealth than there is actual wealth to satisfy them. By blocking your purchase, they are trying to prevent the paper versus physical reality from being exposed. They need you to stay in the digital playground, where they control the rules, the prices, and the exit doors. The banking collateral collapse is the ultimate reason for the invisible wall. It is a battle for the very survival of the fiat regime, and your bank account is the front line. As the value of their bonds continues to melt away, expect the walls to get higher, the glitches to get more frequent, and the desperate attempts to keep you in the system to become more overt. They aren't protecting your money from fraud. They are protecting themselves from you. The digital gatekeepers have shown their hand, and the architecture of the trap is now visible to anyone willing to look. But knowing the walls are closing in is only half the battle. The other half is finding the cracks in the foundation before the cement hardens. This is Chapter 7, The Guerilla Guide to Stacking. We have spent this journey dissecting the transaction declined phenomenon, the secret reclassification of MCC 5094, and the desperate collateral collapse that has forced the banks to hold your savings hostage. Now we move from the why to the how. If the traditional high-speed digital highway to financial safety is being barricaded, it is time to take the off-roads. You must pivot from a passive consumer to a strategic acquirer, utilizing a guerrilla mindset to bypass the algorithmic Iron Curtain and secure your physical sovereignty while the window is still cracked open. The first and most powerful weapon in your arsenal is the local coin shop, or the LCS. For years, the convenience of the massive online dealers, the AppMexes and JM Bullions of the world, made us lazy. We became accustomed to clicking a button and waiting for a mailman. But the banks have compromised that supply chain by standing between your card and the dealer's merchant account. Your local coin shop operates in a different reality. When you walk into a local shop, you're stepping out of the digital panopticon. These dealers often operate on the old world rules of trust and physical settlement. Most importantly, the LCS is the last bastion of the cash economy. While your bank can track, flag, and block a $2,000 digital transfer to an online bullion giant, they cannot stop you from walking into a local shop with paper currency and walking out with a tube of silver eagles. Cash is the ultimate analog bypass to a digital blockade. By using cash at a local level, you eliminate the MCC 5094 flag entirely. There's no algorithm, no security review, and no 18-minute hold time. There is only the weight of the metal in your hand and the privacy of the transaction. However, as the banking crisis intensifies in 2026, even the cash economy is under pressure. This is why you must also reevaluate where you store your primary liquidity. If you're still banking with the too-big-to-fail institutions, the Chases, the Wells Fargos, the Bank of Americas, you are banking with the very entities that are most deeply entangled in the collateral collapse. These are the front lines of the blockade. To stay ahead of the curve, you must consider moving your operating capital to smaller local credit unions or community banks. These institutions are often not yet fully integrated into the aggressive AI-driven risk profiling systems used by the megabanks. They are more likely to value the individual relationship and less likely to have a centralized internal compliance script that automatically flags silver purchases as high risk. A credit union is often owned by its members, meaning they have a vestigial interest in your financial mobility rather than just the survival of the Federal Reserve S bond market. Moving your funds to these smaller pipes can often buy you the time and the clearance you need to complete your stack without the friction of a megabank or its algorithmic cage. The urgency of this shift cannot be overstated. We are currently in the early friction phase of capital controls. This is the period where the system is still trying to look functional while quietly installing the locks. But as we saw in the lessons from Lebanon and Greece, the transition from technical difficulties to a total bank holiday happens in the blink of an eye. There will come a day, perhaps sooner than any of us want to admit, when the transaction declined. The message isn't just for silver, it will be for any withdrawal that threatens the bank's solvency. The Guerilla guide is about completing your physical acquisition before that day arrives. You must treat every successful silver purchase as a victory in a war of attrition. Whether it is through peer-to-peer purchases, local coin shows, or the strategic use of postal money orders, which often bypass the standard merchant category flags, the goal is to convert your devaluing fiat into hard collateral before the digital gates lock permanently. This is the resolution to the conflict we've explored. The protagonist, the informed saver, overcomes the normalcy bias by realizing that the buy button is a privilege, not a right, in a debt-based system. You must stop asking the bank for permission to be wealthy. You must embrace the friction, find the workarounds, and understand that the more the system tries to stop you from buying silver, the more valuable that silver actually is. The invisible wall is only a barrier if you try to walk through the front door. By decentralizing your purchasing methods and prioritizing physical self-custody, you are building a bunker that no algorithm can penetrate. The ship is taking on water, and the crew is currently trying to weld the doors to the lifeboats shut so the passengers don't panic. This video is your warning to jump now. If you have been waiting for the perfect price or the right time, look at your screen. Look at the transaction failed reports. Look at the COMEX ghost town. The right time was yesterday, but the last time is right now. Complete your stack. Secure your sovereignty. Take your wealth out of the digital cloud and put it into the physical world where it belongs. Because once those gates lock for the final time, the only people who will be truly free are the ones who ignored the glitches, bypassed the banks, and took delivery while the world was still arguing about the price.